The day was golden. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the Villa Marino, sparkling across marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Outside, the Mediterranean Sea shimmered like a sheet of diamonds. Inside, Italy's most powerful men laughed over wine, pretending peace was easy to buy. But among them all sat one little girl, silent, still, and watching everything. Her name was Lena. She was small enough to vanish behind a dinner chair, quiet enough to be forgotten in a crowd. But there was something in her eyes, sharp, aware, almost too old for her tiny face. Lena could not speak. Since birth, silence had been her only world. But what she lacked in voice, she made up for in sight. She could read what others couldn't even hear. Lips, whispers, secrets. At the center of the gala sat Don Salvatore Marino, the mafia boss everyone feared and respected. Dressed in a crisp white suit, his silver hair slicked back, he laughed deeply, clinking his glass with a group of foreign businessmen. To everyone else, he was a legend, the man who controlled half the coast. To Lena, he was simply Zio Sal, Uncle Sal, the man who once found her shivering outside a bakery, wrapped in rags, and took her in as his own. Marta, the kind waitress who looked after Lena, leaned down and smiled. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" Lena nodded, clutching her sketchbook. She was drawing, not people, but lips, the way they moved, the shapes of words. It was her secret game. She watched, memorized, and understood. At another table sat four Japanese men, dressed in fine black suits, their movements precise, polite, disciplined. They spoke softly, rarely smiling. Their presence was unusual and important. Don Salvatore was finalizing a business deal with them, a partnership that could unite East and West. It was supposed to be a day of peace, a day of celebration. But peace has a strange way of hiding danger. Lena glanced at the four men. Their faces were calm. Their lips moved in quick, small phrases. She tilted her head, focusing, reading silently. "When he lifts the fork, don't rush it. In the white sauce." Her pencil froze. Her wide brown eyes blinked, uncertain at first. Maybe she read it wrong. Maybe she misunderstood. But then one of the men leaned closer, whispering, "It will look like nothing happened. Just a peaceful lunch." Lena's small heart began to race. She looked down at the dishes being prepared on the long table, silver trays, steaming plates, creamy white truffle sauce. The same sauce that Don Salvatore loved. She swallowed hard, glancing at Marta. The waitress was busy pouring wine, laughing nervously with the guests. No one else noticed. Lena looked again at the men. Their eyes shifted toward the kitchen door. A waiter appeared, pushing a trolley. On it, a single porcelain plate covered by a silver lid. The men's lips moved again. "There it is. In his portion only." Lena's breath caught. Her tiny hands trembled. She wanted to scream, but no sound would come. Her world was still, silent. She stood up, clutching her notebook tightly. Her eyes darted from the men to the boss. Don Salvatore smiled warmly at her across the room, raising his glass playfully, like a proud father. She tried to smile back, but tears gathered in her eyes. She shook her head slightly, hoping he would notice something was wrong. He didn't. He turned back to his guests, laughing. Lena took a few steps forward. The crowd blurred around her. The waiter was getting closer with the trolley. The silver lid gleamed in the sunlight. She could feel every heartbeat inside her chest, fast, sharp, terrified. In her mind, she saw the man who saved her life, coughing, gasping, falling from that very table. No, she couldn't let that happen. Not to him. But what could a child do in a room full of power, politics, and lies? Would anyone believe a little girl who couldn't even speak? The waiter reached Don Salvatore's table. He bowed politely, lifted the silver lid, and placed the elegant plate in front of the mafia boss. Truffle sauce, freshly grated. A perfect aroma. The boss smiled, picked up his fork. Lena's eyes widened. She tried to move, but her legs wouldn't obey. The room felt heavier, her breath shorter. She looked at the 4 Japanese men again. They watched silently. One of them nodded. The others smiled faintly. And in that moment, Lena understood everything. Never ignore what your eyes tell you, Lena. The world may lie, but lips never do. Don Salvatore's words from months ago echoed in her head. Her fear turned into fire. Lena ran. The sound of her small shoes echoed on the marble floor. Guests turned, startled. Marta gasped. Lena? Don Salvatore looked up, confused, as the little girl sprinted across the hall, her face pale, her hand raised like she was chasing time itself. Everyone's laughter died instantly. Lena reached the table. The boss blinked. Piccola? What are you? But before he could finish, she slapped the plate off the table. Porcelain shattered. The sauce splattered across the marble floor like spilled blood. The hall went silent. Guards moved instantly, their hands on guns. Guests whispered, confused. Don Salvatore stood slowly, staring at the trembling child beside his ruined meal. His voice was low but dangerous. Who touched my plate? The waiter stammered. "Yes, sir. I brought it from the kitchen." But Lena wasn't looking at him. She was staring straight at the 4 Japanese men. Her chest heaved. Her eyes filled with tears, fear, and anger. They didn't move. They just sat there, still as statues, their expressions unreadable. One of them slowly placed his napkin on the table and whispered to the others. She saw. Lena's knees weakened. She didn't know what would happen next, only that she had stopped something terrible. But had she just made it worse? The boss's guards surrounded her protectively. Marta ran to her side, holding her shoulders. Lena, sweetheart, what happened? Lena grabbed her notebook with shaking hands. She scribbled quickly, pressing hard enough to tear the paper. The boss leaned down, frowning, reading the words. Don't eat. They put something in it. A chill swept through the room. Guests exchanged uneasy looks. Don Salvatore straightened slowly, his face turning to stone. His eyes lifted toward the 4 men at the far end of the table. They didn't blink. They didn't run. They simply watched him, as if waiting. Marta held Lena close, whispering, It's okay. It's okay. But Lena's eyes stayed fixed on the men. Her instincts screamed. Something else was coming. The boss raised his hand. His tone was quiet, but it silenced the hall. Bring me the chef. A guard hurried out. The others blocked the exits. The 4 men stayed seated, perfectly calm, like chess pieces that had just made their move. Lena clung to Marta's arm, shaking. She had saved him, she thought. But as she glanced back at the 4 men, she saw one of them lean slightly toward the other, his lips moving just enough for her to see. Phase 1 failed. Proceed quietly. Her blood turned cold. They weren't scared. They weren't finished. Lena didn't know it yet, but by saving one life, she had just started a war. The grand Italian gala that had begun in laughter now stood frozen in silence. All eyes were locked on the tiny girl, trembling beside a shattered porcelain plate. Her hand still hovered in the air, shaking, sauce dripping from her fingers like spilled guilt. Don Salvatore Marino, the mafia boss feared by half the world, hadn't moved. He just stared at her, eyes narrowing. Lena. His deep voice finally broke the silence. What did you do? Lena's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her heart pounded. Everyone stared, guards, guests, waiters, even the 4 Japanese men sitting at the far end of the table. The boss's men began to move, thinking she'd gone mad, thinking she'd disrespected him. Marta, the kind waitress, rushed in and shielded the little girl. Please, Don Salvatore. She didn't mean any harm. But Lena shook her head violently, tears welling in her eyes. She grabbed a napkin, a pen from Marta's apron, and scribbled with trembling hands. She held it up for him to read. Big, uneven letters. DONTAT they PUT something. The words hit Don Salvatore like a gunshot. He looked at the napkin, then at the girl, then slowly turned toward the 4 Japanese guests. They were still, silent, watching. His voice came out cold. Is this true? One of them smiled politely, bowing slightly. Don Marino, There must be misunderstanding. We respect you. Another raised a hand, calm as a saint. Perhaps the child is frightened, but Lena's small hands tugged at his sleeve again. She shook her head furiously, mouthing the words, "They're lying." Don Salvatore waved his guards forward. "Take that plate. Test it." Now, two men in suits stepped forward, collecting the shattered remains carefully with gloves. The crowd began to whisper. Was the child right? Was someone trying to kill him? Here, in his own home? The man disappeared into the side room where his private chemist worked. Every second that passed felt like thunder. Lena stood close to Marta, clutching her arm. Her eyes darted between the boss and the guests. The Japanese men never looked afraid. In fact, one of them smiled faintly, a slow, deliberate smile that chilled her blood. She understood what that meant. She had seen that kind of smile before, on the streets, before something bad happened. The boss didn't speak. He poured himself a glass of wine, his hands steady. Everyone in the room watched, waiting, unable to breathe. Then, a door opened. The chemist entered, pale, sweating. He leaned close to Don Salvatore and whispered in his ear. The boss's eyes darkened. He stood slowly, lifted his glass, and said aloud, "Cyanide." The word echoed like a curse through the hall. Gasps broke out. Guests stood up, horrified. Marta covered her mouth. Lena flinched, tears streaming down her cheeks. Don Salvatore's voice dropped to a growl. "You brought poison into my house?" He turned toward the four men, his tone sharp as broken glass. "You came here with smiles and tried to kill me." The oldest of the four bowed his head slightly. "You misunderstand. We would never." "Enough!" The boss's hand slammed against the table. Glass shattered. Guards raised their guns instantly. Guests ducked, screaming. But still, the four men didn't move. And then Lena saw it. One of the Japanese men, the one sitting closest to the wall, leaned toward the others and whispered something fast, almost too quiet to see. Her eyes followed his lips, and what she read froze her blood. "They won't find the real one." Her gaze snapped to the kitchen door. Waiters were moving nervously, some whispering, some shaking. One of them carried a tray of wine glasses, his hands trembling. Lena's body went cold. She grabbed Marta's wrist, pulling hard, pointing to the waiter. Marta frowned, confused. "Lena, what is it?" The little girl shook her head and pointed again, more urgently this time. Don Salvatore noticed her panic. "What is it, Piccola?" She pointed to the kitchen, mouthing desperately. "Another one." The boss's eyes sharpened. "Another what?" Lena pointed toward the waiter, then mimed drinking. Don Salvatore turned instantly. "Stop him!" The waiter froze. Two guards rushed forward, grabbing him by the arms. The tray tilted. A single glass fell, shattering on the floor. The waiter's face went white. The boss approached slowly, his shoes clicking on marble. "What's in the drink?" The man trembled. I don't know, signore. I was told." "By who?" But before he could answer, his body jerked. His eyes rolled back. Foam began to spill from his mouth. He collapsed, dead. Gasps. Screams. The crowd panicked again. The boss's guards surrounded him, but it was too late. Someone had silenced the witness. Lena clung to Marta's dress, sobbing silently. Her small hand pointed again toward the four men, but now their seats were empty. They were gone. In seconds. The boss's fury shook the air. "Find them!" N.O.W. Dozens of men stormed out of the hall, shouting, splitting through corridors and gardens. The sunlight outside suddenly felt colder. Don Salvatore knelt beside Lena. His voice softened, almost fatherly. "You saved my life, Piccola. You understand that?" She looked up at him with tearful eyes and shook her head slowly. He smiled faintly, trying to calm her. "You did good. You're safe now." But Lena's eyes didn't agree. Her gaze drifted toward the balcony doors, wide open, curtains fluttering. And there, through the thin gap of sunlight, she saw movement. A shadow. A figure watching from outside, tall, still, hidden. Her heartbeat quickened. The world blurred. The figure turned and vanished behind the marble pillars. She tugged Don Salvatore's sleeve urgently, pointing toward the balcony. He followed her gaze, signaled a guard. Two men ran out, but when they reached the terrace, there was no one. Only the sea breeze. Only silence. The boss straightened, his jaw tight. He looked down at Lena. "Tell me, little one, what did you see?" She hesitated, then raised her small hands, shaping the words silently, slowly. Her lips formed three clear syllables. "Not finished yet." The words hit him harder than any bullet. He turned toward Marta, voice low. "Get her somewhere safe." Marta nodded quickly, leading Lena away. But Lena kept glancing back over her shoulder, her small hand clutching her notebook like a shield. As they walked through the hallway, she could still hear his men shouting, the boss giving orders, chaos echoing through the once holy hall of laughter. But her mind was somewhere else. On the lips she had read, on the smile she'd seen, on the promise that wasn't over. She didn't know who the men truly worked for. She didn't know why they wanted Don Salvatore dead. But deep down, she understood one thing. They were too calm to be afraid of failure. They had planned this for too long, and that meant it wasn't over yet. Marta knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. "It's okay, Lena. You did something very brave today." Lena stared out the window, eyes distant. The sunlight glimmered on the broken glass in the dining hall behind her, the same way it had glimmered on the poisoned plate. She wrote one last thing in her notebook. Marta read it quietly. They said, "Not the only ones." Outside, somewhere beyond the villa walls, 4 black cars drove away toward the horizon, engines humming softly. And from one of the back seats, a hand lifted a phone. A voice spoke in Japanese. "He lived. Proceed with the second plan." Back in the villa, Lena turned her head sharply. Even though she couldn't hear the words, she somehow felt them. And for the first time, the tiny girl who couldn't speak wished she couldn't read lips either. The poison was just the beginning, and somewhere in that silent space between truth and danger, a new shadow had already moved into place. The villa that once glowed with laughter now stood in tense silence. The poison plate had been destroyed, the culprits gone, and yet, Lena could feel it. The danger hadn't left. The air itself felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Every face looked frightened, every whisper suspicious. And as the sun began to set over the Mediterranean Sea, its golden light turned the marble floors into pools of trembling fire, like the calm before another storm. Don Salvatore Marino stood near the window, his white suit now speckled with the dark stains of the chaos that had erupted hours earlier. He hadn't said a word for minutes. His men moved quietly around him, sweeping the dining hall, checking every door, every guest. But nothing could quiet the sound inside his mind, the echo of that little girl's warning. They put something. He owed her his life. And yet, his gut told him this was far from over. In a quiet corner, Lena sat beside Marta, clutching her sketchbook. Her small face looked pale, her eyes darting to every movement in the room. She didn't hear the music anymore, just the rhythm of fear pulsing in her chest. Marta whispered, trying to comfort her. "It's okay, sweetheart. You did the right thing. It's all over now." But Lena didn't nod. Her eyes, always sharp, were fixed on the balcony doors. They were open again, and through the flowing white curtains she saw shadows moving in the garden. Lena's heart skipped. She leaned forward, squinting, reading the lips of 2 men standing by the fountain. They weren't guests, she could tell by their posture, by their hurried gestures. Their lips moved quickly. Plan B. If the boss doesn't die, the son will. Her fingers froze around the pencil. The son, Marco, 17 years old, cheerful, reckless, and kind to her like a big brother. He was in the garden, playing his guitar near the roses, completely unaware that death had just turned toward him. Lena shot to her feet, knocking her chair over. Marta gasped. "Lena? What's wrong?" The girl grabbed a napkin and wrote fast, her handwriting jagged and urgent. "They want to kill Marco." The words made Marta's blood run cold. She looked toward the balcony. No one else had noticed. Don Salvatore was still speaking with his men, his back turned. Marta rushed to him. Don Salvatore. It's Lena, she says. He turned sharply. Marta held up the napkin with shaking hands. Don Salvatore's eyes hardened. He didn't hesitate. Marco, where is he? A guard stammered. Outside, Signore, near the garden. The boss's voice roared through the hall. N-O-W. The next moments moved like lightning. Guards sprinted through the balcony doors. Marta followed, holding Lena's hand. Outside, the sunlight glowed through the olive trees, turning the garden into gold, but the peace was a lie. Behind the fountain, two waiters moved quietly, their faces hidden beneath white caps. One carried a tray with 2 glasses of wine, and through her sharp little eyes, Lena caught it, the faint glint of a vial being poured into one glass. Marco sat on the stone bench, strumming his guitar, humming softly. He smiled as he saw the waiter approach. Hey, finally, something to drink. Lena's legs started to run before her mind even caught up. Her small shoes pounded the gravel path. Marta shouted her name, but Lena didn't stop. Marco! D-O-N-T. Her voice didn't come out, but her heart screamed louder than sound. Marco lifted the glass. The sunlight caught it, reflecting off the rim. Lena lunged forward. Her tiny hand slapped the glass so hard it flew from his grasp and shattered on the stones. Wine splattered across the roses. Marco blinked, startled. Lena? What the? Before he could finish, Marta reached them, gasping. Don't drink anything. It's poison. Marco froze, the shock hitting him like a wave. Don Salvatore burst through the doors moments later, guards behind him. His eyes went from Lena to the glass shards on the ground, to the fake waiters by the fountain. Get them. The men tried to run, but bullets ripped through the air. One fell instantly, the other tried to reach the garden wall. Lena turned and saw it. A thin red dot dancing on his shoulder. A sniper's laser. But then, it moved. The dot slid across the garden until it stopped on her. Lena froze. The air vanished from her lungs. The light burned on her chest like fire. Don Salvatore shouted, "Down!" He dove toward her, pulling her to the ground as a single gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet shattered the marble pillar beside them, raining dust and shards. Screams filled the garden. Guards scattered, shouting orders. Marta pulled Lena close, shielding her. Marco grabbed his father's arm. Who's shooting? From where? Don Salvatore's voice thundered. The roof! The villa roof! He turned to his men. No one leaves this place alive, G.O. Guards stormed back inside. But Lena didn't move. Her small hands trembled as she pointed toward the broken window above the terrace. Her lips shaped words Don Salvatore barely caught. It's not them. The boss frowned. What do you mean, not them? Lena pointed at the fallen waiter, the one shot dead. His hand still clutched a small earpiece. She read his lips. His last whisper still forming as he died. Tell Ricardo. Plan failed. Her eyes widened. Ricardo. Don Salvatore's own aide. The man he trusted more than anyone. For a moment, everything around them blurred. The noise, the shouting, the wind. Only those words remained. Don Salvatore's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Ricardo had been with him since the beginning. His right hand, his shadow, his brother in blood. Could it be true? He turned toward the villa, eyes sharp as knives. Ricardo stood on the balcony, watching. Their eyes met. For a second, nothing moved. And then Ricardo smiled. A small, slow, knowing smile. Lena saw it, and every part of her screamed inside. She pulled Don Salvatore's sleeve, shaking her head desperately. No, no, he's bad. But the boss was frozen, torn between disbelief and rage. Then, from inside the villa, came a shout. He's running. Don Salvatore stood instantly. After him. Guards stormed the villa. Lena clutched Marta's hand, staring after them. Her lips formed words silently, trembling. I told you not finished yet. The garden was chaos again, smoke rising from the gunfire, guards shouting directions, the last light of sunset turning everything red and gold. Marco looked at her in disbelief. "You saved me." She shook her head. "Not yet," she mouthed. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly. The police were coming. But Lena knew what that meant. It wasn't safety. It was the beginning of a deeper game, one that reached beyond the villa, beyond the poison, beyond even the men she had seen. Because the person they trusted most was already gone. Don Salvatore watched the horizon where Ricardo had disappeared, his voice breaking in fury and pain. "He was like a son to me." Lena stood beside him, silent, small, but fearless. She lifted her notebook again, writing one last message. He read it slowly under the bleeding sunset light. "Sometimes family is the most dangerous lie." The boss closed his eyes, his jaw tight. The war had changed shape. It was no longer about poison. It was about betrayal. And as the first sirens reached the gates of Villa Marino, a little girl who could not speak had just revealed a truth powerful enough to destroy a kingdom built on silence. The night after the betrayal was not a night at all. It was a storm waiting to break. The Marino villa had become a fortress. Guards patrolled every corridor. Lights stayed on through the dark hours. And yet, no one felt safe. Because the enemy wasn't outside anymore. He had been one of them. Ricardo, the man Don Salvatore had raised like family, had vanished into the city with secrets that could destroy them all. Every roadblock came back empty. Every lead went cold. But Lena couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her small guest bed, knees pulled to her chest, her wide eyes reflecting the lightning that flashed outside the window. Her mind replayed Ricardo's smile, that haunting smirk right before he ran. She could still read his lips from that balcony. "The child won't live to see sunrise." Her heart froze. He hadn't met Marco. He meant her. Downstairs, Don Salvatore stood by the fireplace, staring at the flickering flames. Marta sat nearby, exhaustion written all over her face. "She hasn't slept," Marta whispered. "She's still shaken." The boss nodded slowly. "She saved my life twice, Marta. I will protect her with mine." But even as he spoke the words, something deep inside him trembled, because he knew how Ricardo thought. And if Ricardo wanted the girl gone, he wouldn't send anyone else. He'd come himself. The rain outside turned heavier, drumming against the glass. The guards at the gate stood under umbrellas, shifting nervously. Inside, the air smelled of wet stone and gun oil. Lena stood by the window, watching the lightning. Then, she froze. In one flash, she saw it. A figure, standing by the far gate, tall, still, holding something long and dark. A rifle. She ran out of the room, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. Her small hands clutched her notebook. She ran down the hallway, her heart thundering louder than the storm. Marta saw her and called out, "Lena, what's wrong?" Lena didn't stop. She scribbled while running, "Man with gun outside, near gate." She shoved the note into Marta's hand and pointed frantically toward the window. Marta's eyes widened. Don Salvatore. The boss turned, his instincts flaring to life. He barked orders. "Lights off. Everyone down." The chandeliers went dark. Only the thunder lit the room in brief, ghostly flashes. Guards moved fast, taking positions, aiming toward the rain-soaked gardens. And in one of those blinding flashes, they saw him. Ricardo. Umbrella gone, face half lit by lightning. Gun raised. The first shot shattered the window. Glass exploded across the room. Marta screamed, pulling Lena down. The second shot hit the marble pillar behind Don Salvatore. He ducked, shouting, "Get the girl out!" But Lena wasn't thinking of running. She turned, eyes scanning Ricardo's lips through the storm. He was shouting something to someone else in the dark. "Now! Move inside. Take her alive." Her pulse spiked. They weren't just shooting from outside. There were men already inside. The back door burst open. Two masked men rushed in, guns raised. Guards fired. The sound of gunfire thundered through the marble halls. Sparks flew as bullets hit walls. The air filled with smoke and screams. Lena grabbed Marta's hand, trying to pull her toward the staircase. But a man blocked the way, tall, dressed as a waiter, holding a pistol. His voice was calm, chilling. "Give me the girl." Marta stepped in front of Lena, shaking her head. "Over my dead body." For a moment, time froze. Lena's small fingers gripped Marta's sleeve. She could see the man's lips. "I don't need both." Lena shoved Marta aside just as the gun went off. The bullet grazed her arm. Burning pain shot through her. She fell to the ground, gasping, clutching her arm. Marta screamed. "Lena!" The guard nearby fired, dropping the masked man before he could shoot again. Don Salvatore rushed toward the sound, rage flooding his face. He knelt beside Lena, blood staining her white dress. "Stay with me, Piccola. Stay with me." She shook her head, tears mixing with rain and smoke. She pointed toward the window, where Ricardo's shadow had vanished. She mouthed one word: "Inside." Don Salvatore understood instantly. He turned to his men. "He's in the house." The storm outside raged harder. Lightning flashed across the grand staircase as the boss led the charge upstairs. The halls echoed with boots and shouts. Lena tried to stand, but Marta held her. "No, you're hurt." But Lena shook her head, refusing. She tore a strip from Marta's dress and tied it around her arm, her small hands trembling but determined. She couldn't stay behind, not when Ricardo was still there. Not when she was the reason he'd come. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Don Salvatore raised his gun, stepping inside the study, the room where he'd once signed peace deals, toasted allies, raised his children. Now it smelled of rain and betrayal. Ricardo stood by the window, gun in one hand, blood dripping from a wound on his shoulder. He smiled faintly. "So, it ends here, old man?" Salvatore's voice cracked with pain. "Why, Ricardo? Why betray the family that made you?" Ricardo chuckled bitterly. "Because you never saw who really owns it." Before Salvatore could reply, Lena appeared in the doorway, small, soaked, pale. Ricardo froze, his smirk faltering. "You." She stepped forward slowly, clutching her notebook, her eyes locked on his lips. He whispered, "Should have killed you first." Don Salvatore shouted, "Don't you touch her." But Ricardo didn't aim at the boss. He turned his gun toward Lena. The moment stretched, the thunder roaring like war drums. Ricardo's finger tightened on the trigger. Lena's eyes widened. And then Marco appeared behind him, tackling him to the floor. The gun fired, the bullet tearing through a painting instead of flesh. They struggled violently. Ricardo swung his elbow back, slamming Marco into the desk. Don Salvatore fired. The bullet hit Ricardo's hand, the gun clattering to the ground. He stumbled back, clutching his arm. Lena moved closer, ignoring the pain in her arm. Ricardo looked at her, his expression wild, desperate. "You think you won, little mute girl?" he hissed. "You don't know what's coming." She read his lips, trembling. "They're already inside." Her breath caught. "No." He smiled darkly. "You stopped the poison. You stopped me. But you can't stop them." Lightning flashed, and in its glow, Lena saw movement outside the window. Black cars. Men in dark coats. Dozens of them. Don Salvatore turned, his face pale. "More men," Marco whispered. "How many?" Lena stepped to the window, her lips barely moving. "Too many." Outside, engines rumbled. Headlights cut through the storm. The real attack was just beginning. Don Salvatore looked at Lena, his voice low and full of regret. "You shouldn't be here, Bambina. I promised to protect you, but I've brought the war to your feet." Lena shook her head fiercely, tears in her eyes. She wrote quickly in her notebook and held it up. "You didn't bring it. It was already here." The boss stared at her, a child with a wound, standing tall amidst fear. And in that moment, he realized something. The little girl wasn't fragile. She was fire. Outside, the gates exploded open. Ricardo's men flooded the courtyard, shouting, firing, moving fast through the rain. Don Salvatore's guards shouted warnings, returning fire. The villa shook with the sound of war. And right there, in the middle of the chaos, stood a silent girl, clutching her notebook. watching everything unfold with eyes that saw more than anyone else. Because through the storm, she had just read the lips of one of the attackers. Take the girl alive. She wasn't a witness anymore. She was the target. As thunder swallowed the villa and glass shattered around them, Lena turned to Don Salvatore, her expression calm, but her hands trembling. She mouthed three words that made his heart stop cold. The night had turned to dawn. But peace never came. Smoke curled above the shattered villa. Bodies lay still on the marble floors, guns glinting in the pale morning light. Lena stood in the middle of the ruined hall, silent, pale, and shaking. Her small hand clutched her notebook, now stained with dust and blood. She had been the key to saving lives. But now, she was the reason the war had begun. Don Salvatore's men had fought through the night. They won, if you could call it winning. Half his guards were gone, the gates blown open, the once proud villa torn apart. Marco leaned against the doorway, his arm bandaged, his eyes hollow. Marta sat beside Lena, brushing dust from her hair. But the girl didn't look up. She was staring at the broken portrait hanging crooked above the fireplace, a painting of Don Salvatore and his wife, and right behind the ripped canvas, something glimmered. Lena rose slowly, drawn by instinct. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing at the faint metal plate hidden beneath the torn cloth. She reached out, wiped the dust away. It was a small vault door. Marco saw her and frowned. "What is that?" Lena pointed, then mouthed carefully, "Something they wanted." Don Salvatore entered just then. His white suit darkened with blood and rain. He looked exhausted, older than ever before. He followed her gaze. His face froze. "That vault," he whispered. Only Ricardo knew it existed. Lena glanced at him, her eyes filled with the same question everyone was afraid to ask. What was inside? The boss knelt and pressed his palm against the steel. There was no keypad, no keyhole, just a small scanner, long dead. "It opens only with my thumbprint," he said. "And his?" Marco stepped forward. "You mean Ricardo?" Don Salvatore nodded slowly. "Yes. I made him the failsafe, because I trusted him more than my own blood." He let out a bitter laugh. "Foolish, isn't it?" The sound of the rain filled the silence between them. Lena's eyes flickered toward the floor, where Ricardo's phone lay, cracked but still glowing faintly. She picked it up, swiped through, and paused. A video, time-stamped only an hour before the attack. She tapped play. Ricardo's voice calm, bitter. "Don Salvatore believes in loyalty. But he never looked at the truth. The empire he built wasn't his. It belonged to them, the ones behind the Gala, behind the deals, behind every smile." Lena's heart pounded. She tilted the phone slightly. Ricardo's face filled the screen, his expression cold but tired. "I didn't betray him," he continued. "I just uncovered what he refused to see. The poison, the Gala, the Japanese investors, all part of one thing. And the girl. The girl is the proof." Don Salvatore's eyes narrowed. "What does he mean, the girl?" Lena's hands trembled. She rewound the video, replayed his last line. "The girl is the proof." She shook her head, confused and scared. "Why her?" Marta placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe he's lying, sweetheart. He wanted to scare us." But Lena's gut told her it wasn't a lie. Don Salvatore opened the vault. The door creaked, the sound echoing through the hollow hall. Inside, stacks of papers, files, and a single metal box sat in the center. He pulled it out slowly, setting it on the table. The lid opened with a hiss, and inside lay documents stamped with Japanese characters. And photographs. Lena's breath caught. The photos were old, years old, but one of them showed a small hospital room in Tokyo, and in the middle of it, a baby, wrapped in a pink blanket. Her blanket. Don Salvatore stared, stunned. Marta gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. The next photo showed the same baby in the arms of a young woman, a nurse, smiling through tears. Behind her stood 4 Japanese men, the same ones Lena had read lips from at the Gala. They weren't strangers. They were the same men from that night. Lena's eyes widened in realization, her heart racing. She flipped through the papers quickly. There was a birth record. The mother's name was blurred out, but under father, one word was typed in bold. R. Marino. Don Salvatore's voice broke into a whisper. R. Ricardo. Marco stepped back, shaking his head. That's impossible. Lena looked up, confusion and fear tangled in her gaze. She mouthed, I was his? The boss's eyes filled with pain. He had a child before he joined me. He said she died in Japan. He turned toward her slowly. Lena. He lied. He gave you away, hid you, and when he saw you at the gala, his voice trailed off, heavy with understanding. He realized who you were. The truth struck like thunder. Ricardo hadn't wanted to kill her because she was a witness. He wanted to protect her from the men behind the poison, but they turned on him when he failed. Lena stumbled back, tears filling her eyes. All this time, the man who smiled at her from across the room wasn't just a villain. He was her father. Don Salvatore turned toward the broken window, the rain streaking down his face like tears. He tried to end the deal, stop the organization, but they used me, used my trust, to finish what he started. He looked at Lena, his voice trembling. And now they will come for you again, Bambina, because you carry his blood. And their secret. Lena pressed her notebook to her chest, whispering through her lips, I don't want to be his secret. Outside, the first light of dawn broke through the storm clouds. But peace didn't come with it. Instead, 3 black cars appeared at the far road, their engines silent, their windows tinted. Don Salvatore's guards shouted from the gates, raising their weapons. Marta looked out the window, fear rising in her throat. They're back. Marco grabbed his gun, jaw tight. Who are they? Don Salvatore didn't answer. He only stared at the cars and whispered, the ones who smiled at me at every business dinner. As the cars stopped, the doors opened in perfect unison. 4 men stepped out, all wearing black suits, their faces calm, composed. And even from this distance, Lena recognized them. The 4 Japanese men from the gala. Their lips moved slowly, deliberately, and she read the words like a blade to her heart. We've come for her. Lena's knees went weak. Marta pulled her close. Don Salvatore stepped in front of them both, his voice rising with fury. Over my dead body. But the men didn't shout back. They didn't even draw weapons. They only smiled. That same calm, polite smile they had worn the night of the gala. The smile that now felt like a mask hiding death. Lena's lips moved slowly, trembling as she read their next words through the window. You are not in danger, child. You are the key. Her breath caught. She looked at Don Salvatore, her voice barely forming. What do they mean? He didn't answer, because deep down, he already knew. Whatever truth was buried in those files, in that vault, wasn't finished. And the men outside weren't here to kill. They were here to claim. As the rain eased and sunlight began to pierce through the clouds, Lena stood behind the shattered window, watching the men who had watched her all her life, her father's enemies, and maybe his masters. Her reflection merged with theirs in the glass, her small face framed by the ghosts of a truth she was only beginning to understand. And for the first time since the gala, the tiny girl who could read lips whispered to herself, a single question that would haunt everyone left standing. What if the real poison wasn't in the plate? Because behind every perfect smile, there's a truth sharp enough to kill. And the truth was finally knocking on their door.